Fogel too much for Dixie competitors. Never too much DARPA research, but clearly too much Sullivan. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline June 2022. For our feature story, playing in face-to-face diplomacy tournaments is da bomb, according to some folk anyway. Others are hesitant to stick their toes into the face-to-face pool, thinking that the environment will be too stressful, too cliquey, or too different from just playing online like they're used to. With the North American Grand Prix circuit now back up and running, let's talk to the winners of the last three major North American face-to-face tournaments, and we'll find out how they won, what face-to-face tournament experiences are like, and why you should join them in the remaining summer and fall events. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. Brandon Fogel has won the 36th annual DixieCon tournament held in Chapel Hill, North Carolina during the last weekend in May. Chicago's Fogel bested a field of 35 diplomacy players hailing from 17 different U.S. states, Canadian provinces, or overseas locations. Coming in second was perennial attendee Brian Ecton of Maryland, who actually won the event in 2005, with Texan Ed Sullivan coming in third. That goes along with his second place finish in last year's virtual version of DixieCon. Full results from this event can be found at the www.dixiecon.com website, with complete video coverage available on DBN's YouTube or Twitch channels. Speaking of Ed Sullivan, though, his DBN feature, which we call Back Channel, was busy taping throughout the weekend as he interviewed DixieCon players in his Ed Sullivan signature style. Let's see now his interview with DC resident Hudson Defoe, who plays diplomacy with, shall we say, his own particular style. Roll 'em.
Hello, everyone. Okay, first of all, I talk first, but this is a perfect example. Welcome to Back Channel, the hottest show on DBN. You cannot control this man. He is going to do what he wants to do, and if you are lucky enough to be involved in that, great. But otherwise, he's on his own mission. He made plans to my Germany and Game C tourists today. Round one. Who are you? Tell the viewers. Who are you? And what makes you tick?
Let's see. I play the whole board. Basically, I have fun. You just do whatever you want to. Just have fun playing the game. Who cares what everybody else thinks? Go for victory always. Always have fun. If they can't think of what move you're going to do, basically, unpredictable. That's what I like to do. Unpredictable.
Unpredictable, like telling me you weren't going to Burgundy in spring 1901 and you go. They're building an army in Bliss.
The whole thing is, diplomacy is what? I have to convince you to let me win. Look me dead in the eyes and lie to you without you noticing.
I feel like I noticed.
You know what I'm saying? No. Dead in the eyes is just.
I noticed.
I'm not going to hurt him. Give me the
Look in the camera.
Give him the
Look at the camera.
he needs.
You tell me that you're not going to Burgundy. Tell the camera.
I'm not going to Burgundy. I'm just taking my neutral, basically, and that's it. That's all I do. I'm just a simple man just trying to get a few dollars.
And they're not your dogs. That's what you're telling the person. I'm not interested in your dogs.
I'm playing for a solo. You start the game playing for a solo. Everything else is secondary. I'm trying to be number one. Right now.
You've never met me before, but tell the viewers how great I am.
I don't know about that.
All right, do you think Turkey might be the Bigfoot? Never heard of the Bigfoot?
No.
Sasquatch?
No. Yes, the Bigfoot. Yes, I have Sasquatch.
Do you think Turkey could be the Bigfoot?
It could be.
It's really hard to get this guy serious because that was the most serious I've seen him in about 8 hours. All right, he's not been drinking. But what I want to know is, like, I'm telling you, the viewers, this. You've seen a lot of styles. You've seen me talk to players. I've never met a man harder to pin down and figure out what's happening on his unpredictability. And, frankly, genius at times. Thank you. Tell me how you play this game. Teach us.
You can't. I mean, I say I like to I like being false information to other players, basically. I said, I talked to this guy, he said he's coming after you. He said he's not coming after you. Pass false information. Who cares? You understand? Let pass people that they're gonna come to the other team. You know, the other two players are gonna fight each other. Put that out there. Whisper it out there. Who cares? Make sure no one wants to come after you. Put the false information out there, basically, and just go attack. This man here cost me. You understand? Cost me. If he did not give England, Belgium, basically, I'd have taken out Italy at Rome, basically.
Which is why England was in Belgium.
Yes. Yes. Because if you'd have did that, basically, I was going to take out England next, basically, after I take out Italy. Because you would have had 34 dots if I hadn't done that.
Nah,
30. All I need is 18.
Man, you're able to have some discipline.
Yes. To attack the person who's the strongest person on the board who can stop me from winning, basically.
You didn't attack me then?
No.
You get all the dots and I do all the protection.
No, you're in the middle. You'd have taken out Austria, basically, and we'd have short up the middle. It was
We would have made it.
No, you got England scared like, oh, Hudson, he's at 6 the first year.
Oh, no,
You don't slow him down.
Stop lying about me. I wish there now. All right, look, we got to go. This is our turn. Hudson, good luck in your tournament. We'll see you hopefully on the Words Day.
Yes, hopefully, basically.
By the time you see this broadcast, June's Regatta tournament in Denver, Colorado will have already taken place. But the summertime stretch of diplomacy events continues with the rescheduled Cascadia in Surrey, British Columbia on July 9th and 10th being next in line. If you're not attending Tournament Director Chris Brand's event, then at least you can catch the DBN coverage of Cascadia on that Sunday, July 10th, right here on this DBN channel. Next up after that will be the Boston Massacre, August 12th through 14th, run by Alex Maslow, and then Weasel Moot, run by Sabiha Huja of the Windy City Weasels. That takes place on September 24th and 25th. Make plans now to attend one or more of these exciting opportunities for face-to-face play by visiting the links below. You all know how important diplomacy is to the national security of the United States and its institutions, right? The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, does, which is why in the past it has used diplomacy to teach computers about negotiation. Now the head of that former research project, diplomacy fan and associate professor of computer science at Maryland, Jordan Boyd Graber, has had a second initiative sponsored by DARPA. This one using diplomacy to help computers detect deception. The goal here is to provide better technological tools to help fight cyber criminals and other bad actors. Leading that research with Boyd Graber is a postdoc student at Princeton, Dennis Peskoff, who actually pitched this second project to DARPA himself. Many of you will recognize Dennis from his success in last season's Nexus Press League and from his tournament appearances at DixieCon and other places. I, for one, wish these guys well and hope that their data can not only help thwart cyberware ransom attacks, but also one day help me figure out just what in Hades Brandon Fogel, Adam Silverman, and Tanya Gill are up to when I play with them. Yes, folks, that's foreshadowing for this episode's panel discussion coming right up after our featured interview. The 2022 Online Diplomacy Championship has completed its Round 1 action and is now relaunching for Round 2 under new tournament directors Captain Meme and Hardacre. The playing venue for the ODC alternates, with this year's event taking place on Play Diplomacy. You can follow updates about the relaunch on the forum page at the playdiplomacy.com website. The ODC itself is one of the 3 co-equal world championships we now have in the diplomacy hobby, with the virtual diplomacy championships currently being organized for later this year on the VWDC Discord server, and then the face-to-face World DipCon scheduled for the first weekend of November in conjunction with the Carnage tournament in Mount Snow, Vermont. You can join the Discord servers for the VDC and WDC events by following the links below. Let the championships begin. Now let's take a trip around the various websites and YouTube channels for the content creators, which we call our DBN media partners. The DiploStrats channel on YouTube released an in-depth video recently analyzing just how Ed Sullivan took first place in Nexon's Season 7 full press extended deadline final. Gosh, I seem to be saying Sullivan's name a lot in this episode. Hey, y'all, let's try to make next month's show a Sullivan-free zone, right? Amby and Kaner of the Diplomacy Games podcast also recently released a new episode in which they discuss an ongoing game of Bourse, which is a currency trading game played in conjunction with, in this case, a 10-power diplomacy variant game. They also discuss other games in which they are currently playing, as well as trying to justify having no interview in this episode, due to the fact that Amby apparently cannot differentiate between a Saturday and a Sunday. Okay, Amby. And Brother Board recently released another podcast of his own, focusing on temporary alliance possibilities between Italy and Turkey, as well as other board pairings. You can look for all of these content offerings and other recent diplomacy content by visiting the media page at thenadf.org or visiting the links provided below. Diplomacy League play continues as well this summer, with the Tour of Britain having concluded its third game day on June 12th. The Virtual Diplomacy League is holding its next set of virtual face-to-face games through Discord on June 25th. Going into that third Tour of Britain game day, Zach Moore was leading that tournament, that league, with Ben Kelman in the second position. Currently leading the VDL is Windy City Weasel Christian Brown, with Tim Crosby of Florida in second place. There are, of course, other leagues available at the Nexus League's Discord server, as well as a French language league playing its own season of games for 2022. The best way to keep up with all of this league action is to watch our monthly Diplomacy Broadcast Network show, League Night. A link to last month's show is below, which included coverage of both the VDL and the Tour of Britain. You should also make plans now to join us for the next broadcast of League Night on June 25th, right here on this channel. We'll cover the VDL games played that day, as well as another mystery league. Tune in to find out which one. We've come to the end of the headline segment of this episode of Deadline, and I know what all of you are thinking. This hobby rocks. You enjoy playing in it, but you really, really want to give back instead of just being a diplomacy consumer. Well, let me tell you one thing you can do. The hobby's flagship publication, Diplomacy World, is about to publish its 158th quarterly edition. You know very well that you have something to say about the game or about the hobby, and that the rest of us will want to hear it. Except for you, Sullivan. We've had about enough of you right now, buddy. So unless you are an employment lawyer in Houston named Ed Sullivan, editor Doug Kent would love to get an article from you by the July 1, 2022 deadline. If you recently went to a diplomacy tournament, send Doug your thoughts about how it went. If you recently won a game of virtual or online diplomacy, describe how you did it. Send that to Doug. If you think such and such an opening sucks, or such and such a variant is awesome, we want to hear about it. Contact Doug right now using diplomacyworld@yahoo.com and tell him what article you plan to submit for that next issue or the next one. You'll be glad you did. And then I'll lay off of you, at least for a while, and harangue somebody else. And now it's time for a segment we call My Favorite Things. We'll interview a diplomacy player about that person's diplomacy journey, and then talk about something of particular interest to that hobbyist, whether or not related to diplomacy. This month, we talked to longtime diplomacy player and scout leader, Greg Fairbanks, about his initiative to bring the magic of board gaming to the world of scouting. Well, hello, Greg, and welcome to Deadline.
Hi, David. Good afternoon.
You and I have known each other for more than 30 years at this point, I think, but some of our DBN audience will just have seen you for the first time during the DixieCon coverage a couple of weeks ago. So tell them a little bit about what you do and your diplomacy journey.
Sure. I'm a tax lawyer in Washington, D.C., but I did my undergraduate at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I grew up actually outside of New York in northern New Jersey. So my first real exposure to the hobby, like I think a lot of people maybe, was as a youth, as a real little kid. You play board games with your parents. Get a little bit older, those who like role playing games like I did, you'd play Dungeons and Dragons with your friends like in middle school. And I think it was around like the early part of high school, a friend of mine had a set of diplomacy. And so we would play with 7 of us, and it was always the same 7 people. So you can imagine you don't have a lot of dynamic in terms of changing personalities. And we would play that, and it was a lot of fun. And that was my first exposure to diplomacy. But in high school, we played a lot of those old school games, Cosmic Encounter, Merchant of Venus. I think my first real exposure to more sort of classic wargaming was a friend had a set of Europe Aflame because we thought that Axis and Allies was pretty lame. Like I think a lot of people did at that point. You're like, okay, there's not a lot of gameplay here. But then when I came to Chapel Hill and joined the local gaming group, that was my first exposure to DixieCon. And back then it was held in Carmichael Hall. So I'm really dating myself at that point to whoever's in the hobby of listening to this thing. That's when I first met you.
Yes, you are, in fact, dating yourself to the 90s is what you're doing there.
Yeah, early 90s.
Early 90s, that's exactly right. Early 90s. Well, you do play other board games, like you said. What about diplomacy in particular, tickles your fancy, so to speak?
Well, I think when I first started playing it as a kid, it was the idea that, wait a minute, this has nothing to do with randomness or dice or event cards. It is set up the same every time, and it really is about just, to a certain extent, it's your diplomatic skills. There is the randomness of, who your neighbors are. You can't substitute. I mean, if you're going to get dogpiled by everybody, doesn't matter how good a job you do, you're kind of a goner. But I really like that aspect of it. I think also for those that can kind of buck up a little bit, it's a really kind of fun way to see the game evolve when you're actually physically in it. And sometimes when you're the one doing the stabbing, you're like, oh, this is going to be really, really good. When it's done to you, it doesn't feel so good. But honestly, I appreciate it. And I think I'm at a point now where you kind of know when your position is eroding and you can try to convince the other person. But there's certain times where you're like, yeah, I'm being cut out of this. And there's not a whole, and it's a smart thing. I'm like, I do the exact same thing. Like I'd stab me as well. And I do like that a lot about it.
Sure. Well, speaking of board games in general, you are yourself initiating something rather exciting in the world of scouting. I see you've got your scout uniform on. First, tell us about your background in scouting and then describe your current initiative.
Yeah, and I kind of did this deliberately here. So, I've got 3 children. All of them are involved in scouting. I really wasn't as a youth, but I'm heavily involved now as an adult. And it really is a fantastic way, I think, for adults to connect with their youth. All 3 of mine are actively involved. All 3 of them really like to game. The oldest and youngest kind of complain a lot. I only ever bring my middle guy to DixieCon, Ugomax. So those who are there might remember the really, really tiny guy. And I kind of just do it as a special way to bond with him as the middle child who otherwise might be a little bit forgotten. My oldest, they're so forward-leaning and extroverted. They don't really need the extra like social boost. So I kind of do it more for my middle guy. And the reason why or the initiative is when people think of scouting, you think of things like, hiking and climbing and knots and outdoors stuff. But this particular program is through venturing, which a lot of people are not familiar with, but it's been around since 1998. It's a fully co-ed program for youth 14 to 21, so a little bit older than traditional scouting. And unlike the scouting program, which has a very defined rubric, you go through a process where, at a certain age or stage, you're learning these outdoor skills or life skills. Venturing is all about whatever you want to do as the program. And traditionally, it's always been the kind of thing where you can form a venturing crew, and that's the organizational unit, whereas scouting is troops, venturing is crews. you'd have a crew maybe solely devoted to climbing, or a crew solely devoted towards kayaking and canoeing and whitewater. And I kind of spoke to our Washington, D.C. district leadership. I said, I've got a really kooky idea here. What would you think of a crew focused solely on gaming? Because I remember from my youth, the two biggest inhibitors are critical mass and venue. A lot of games, like diplomacy, only really work when you have the exact right head count. And then there's the venue issue. Where are you going to go where somebody's going to be cool with taking over an entire living room or den or family room for what could be 4, 6, or more hours? And then it dawned on me, venturing. We can go and find an outdoor area with a covered pavilion, all under the auspices of the Scouting USA organization, and get a little bit of the outdoors as well. Because on the flip side, let's face it, a lot of us gamers get tagged with the image of being basement dwellers or being antisocial or what have you. So it seemed like a real win-win. And when I put the idea in front of the Washington, D.C. leadership, I mean, they lit up. And all of a sudden, people out of the woodwork, they're like, "Yeah, I'm a gamer," and it's almost like an AA thing where everybody's saying, I want to admit I'm a gamer too," and everybody was on board. And we're still in the germination phase. We're looking to launch this September, and my big thing is making sure it's done right as opposed to fast. So right now we have a whole bunch of adult volunteers in place. We're getting support from some of the local hobby stores. The next step will be going through some of the bigger area high schools and middle schools and saying, okay, who are your gaming organizations there, and liaising with the appropriate teacher or parent advisor. So I'm pretty excited to get this thing launched. And really the reason for all of this is my love for the hobby and trying to have it grow more with youth.
Do you think this will be a good fit with kids that are already in scouting or interested in scouting either in your area or sort of nationwide as a group?
I'm hoping for both. I'm hoping those that are already into scouting, but you can come into it pretty young. And as it gets more advanced, there are kids who are like, you know what? I really don't want to go on 12-mile hikes in a canyon. That's cool and all, but I really got into it early on just to be with my friends. And this will provide an outlet for those looking for that social aspect without the heavy lift of the more high-end stuff. And then for those who've never done this at all, I'm kind of hoping it'll be a nice way to bring them into the hobby, but do so in a more structured and social environment rather than just doing, one-off pickup games at the local hobby store.
Well, that certainly sounds exciting to me. If there are people watching this who are themselves excited about this and have some kind of connection to scouting and want to be involved in this somehow, maybe in their area, how would they contact you about that?
So we're currently in the process of setting up our website, and Scouts is pretty good about having a methodical process for being able to sign up online. We're just not in a place right now to tell you where to go. So the best thing is going to be is if you're listening and you are interested in any capacity, whether you want to do it locally on your end, whether you want to know more about it because you're in the DC, DMV greater area, or I'm also going to say that because so much of this now can be facilitated through things like Zoom or WebEx or Teams, if you're an adult and you're thinking, hey, I really like this aspect of the hobby, I would love to work with youth and share some of that and be an adult resource. We're always looking for people willing to volunteer, even if it's the most, minute of things. And so the best reach out will be my email, which is going to be G as in golf, A as in alpha, and then Fairbanks, my last name down there. And that's at gmail.com. So again, gafairbanks@gmail.com. You can just put in the subject line, interested in, scout gaming, interested in whatever, and I'll see it and I'll be very responsive.
Well, I appreciate that announcement and that sort of description of your initiative. Let me ask you sort of a sideways question from that. Board gaming in general seems to be on the upswing with younger generations in a way that we haven't seen in a while. Why do you think that is?
I think it'd be hard to, say with certitude what it's going to be, but I look at the games that are coming out now, and I think there's a whole baseline of games that are a lot more accessible for youth. And I think about, Alan Moon's, Ticket to Whatever series. I think a lot of kids get started now with Settlers of Catan. And then you look at some of the more recent games that have won awards, whether it's like Calico, the cat game, the co-op games like Pandemic. I think there's a raft of games there that are easy for kids to play either on their own or with a parent, and they fill a void that just wasn't there beforehand. Because at least the way I looked at it is there was no, Blue Diamond for those of you that are skiers. There's no like sort of intermediate phase, if you will. It's either you're playing those like really old school family games, whether it's Yahtzee or Monopoly or Chutes and Ladders, or all of a sudden it's like, boom, here you go. Here's Here I Stand, or here's Stonewall in the Valley. Knock yourself out. And you're like, oh my goodness. Now you've got all these intermediate games. And I think that really helps with getting young people involved.
That makes a lot of sense, Greg. And Greg, I really do appreciate you being on the show. It's great. It was great to see you a couple of weeks ago after a little COVID-induced absence. And I appreciate what you're doing for, the kids in your area through this scouting initiative.
Thank you so much. And for those that are going to be there, I'm hoping to secure a hall pass from my better wife to be up for WDC and Carnage. So those who I saw in Dixie, hopefully I'll see up there.
We will all consider ourselves duly warned. So thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you so much.
And now for this month's panel discussion. The last three face-to-face tournaments of significant size in the North American hobby were the 2021 DipCon in Mount Snow, Vermont, back in November, the 2022 DipCon in San Jose, California in late April, and then the 36th annual DixieCon just a few weeks ago in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We are fortunate here on Deadline to have the winners of those three events all gathered together for one big discussion about their victories, their experiences, and their views on the face-to-face diplomacy in general. A hearty Deadline welcome to Adam Silverman of California, Tanya Gill of Ontario, and Brandon Fogel of Illinois. Hello to you all. Well, frankly, given that all three of you are on-air DBN personalities yourselves, I doubt that we need to do much in the way of personal introductions, but just in case we have some viewers watching who are completely new to the DBN scene, I want you to, each of you, give us a little biographical information as well as your diplomacy origin story. So let's start with Adam.
Yeah, hi, David. Great to be here. I live in California. I've been out here for about 20 years, grew up on the East Coast, but moved out here for graduate school and stayed out on the left coast. And I'm in the Bay Area, have been organizing local games with diplomacy since the time I've been out here, working with Eddie Bersan and Siobhan Nolan, and as well as the whipping tournament, which I guess we'll hear more about that from Tanya later on today. I can't remember how she finished, but I think it was pretty well. So I got into diplomacy in high school. Like many people, I had a friend who came back from some summer program and said, hey, I learned this game. You want to try to play it? And kind of a group of us in high school got hooked, and we were playing almost every weekend. And I remember that we had some of the rules wrong when we were playing it at the beginning, but we eventually figured that out. And I got in from there to doing some online play when I was in college. Didn't play a lot of face-to-face, but eventually hooked up with a group there in Boston that was holding a yearly house con that would play diplomacy at this house con, and I met a few folks there. And then through my online play, somebody who I had been playing through over email, people used to play over email. I know that probably shows some age here, but said, hey, there is this diplomacy tournament with people from all over the world coming down in Maryland, and you should go to it. And that seemed like a crazy idea, but eventually I was convinced to go. I had a friend who was living near there and I could stay with. And so I drove down from Boston to this World DipCon in Maryland, and got thoroughly spanked at the tournament. But I was hooked. I met a lot of the, people who even today are hobby luminaries, David. I don't think you and I met until Tempest, maybe a few months later than that, but that was the next tournament in the East Coast circuit. And so I went to that and met you, and I met, a whole bunch of other Eddie Bursan and others at either Tempest or DixieCon. And then I was hooked. And I, have been traveling to diplomacy tournaments and enjoying the hobby ever since.
Was that the World DipCon that Jim Yerke held?
It was.
150 players, guys. It was really quite a thing. Won by a British fellow named Simon, right? Simon.
I had absolutely nothing to do with his solo.
Here we go.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't Turkey on that board to his England, and I definitely didn't end with 15 centers to his 18. Didn't happen.
I am so glad that I touched a nerve. Speaking of which, Tanya, you're up. Let's see if we can touch any nerves in your diplomacy history.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Tanya. I'm from Canada, specifically Ontario. And I started playing diplomacy in undergrad, where a friend of mine in my debate team convinced a bunch of us to play online on a website, Web Diplomacy. And so we played that game, and I was pretty hooked pretty fast, but I'd only played online for about a year or two until people that I knew from Web Diplomacy, in fact, people that are quite familiar to DBN, so McCullis and Marcus, told me about that they were going to this tournament in Oxford and in England. And then, I looked it up. It sounded fun. I really liked the game online. So I thought, well, I'd probably like it in person too. So I went to Oxford to play, ended up doing pretty well, came third at that. And then really got kind of hooked since then. Similar to Adam, I had a lot of really, really friendly people in the hobby come up to me and tell me about other tournaments that I could be going to. I remember specifically Dave Maletsky, on the Sunday of Oxford telling me, hey, there's a tournament that I run in Vermont a couple months after, so why don't you come? And then ended up going to that, carpooled with Nicolas Sahuguet, and went down to Vermont for my second tournament. And I think after that, it was just pretty much, okay, how many tournaments can I make it out to and how do I get there? So yeah, that's sort of my diplomacy story.
Well, that's great. It's a great story. It's always great when you can recount your early, experiences fondly, because some people can't, that they have early experiences that are not. Hey, Brandon.
Yes, sir.
It's your turn. Last and probably least, Brandon Defoe.
Yeah, unquestionably least among this crowd. I started playing in graduate school about 20 years ago. We had a group of people who just like playing games, and somehow one of us had heard about this game that had the reputation of ending friendships, and we were like, yeah, we don't like each other that much. Let's give it a shot. I remember we played 2 games in person, and both of them ended kind of badly, like with hurt feelings and stuff. And we decided to play a third one over email, where the turns only went like once a week or something. And we got so into it. And we still stayed friends after that, somewhat surprisingly. But we didn't play anymore because we all got involved in graduate school and going off to jobs and stuff. And then like 15 years later, I had a new group of friends in Chicago, and we were playing games, and I brought this game up, and they were willing to give it a shot. And we played a couple times, and most of them said, no effing way, I want to play this ever again. But one other guy, Carlos Trevino, and I decided to look around and see if there was like a local group who was playing. And I was living in Chicago at the time. And it turned out there's the club here, the Windy City Weasels, which is the best club. And so we both went, and we actually walked in separately, pretended not to know each other, thinking we could, get one over on everyone. We pulled Russia and Turkey in our and so it was like the perfect setup, but we were so worried that everyone was going to figure out that we knew each other that we didn't do anything to take advantage of the fact that nobody knew that we knew each other. And we didn't do that well, and everybody could tell anyway, so they told us that a couple weeks later. So I've been hanging out with the Weasels for the last like 5 or 6 years, and I haven't been to as many tournaments as I would like, just for various reasons, but hopefully now I'll get to go to more. And started DBN a couple of years ago with you, David, and Brian Pravel and Zach Moore, and I managed to sucker people like Tanya and Adam into getting involved, and it's been a great experience, and it's been a wonderful way to survive the pandemic, and also just sort of stay involved with diplomacy even when we're not like in the middle of the fray. But that's my story.
It's a good story, and it's totally right that it was a real lifeline for many of us. Well, your tournament victory was just a couple of weeks ago, Brandon, at DixieCon. So I'm sure it's very fresh in your mind. So tell us, how'd you win?
Honestly, I just listened to Ed Sullivan and did whatever he wanted.
Oh man, don't say that.
That is kind of true, actually. The second round board, Ed and I ended up getting a 2-way draw, and we were England and Russia. We just got along really well. And managed to convince Randy Lawrence Hurt that he had no future, and also Cameron Higbee on the other side that it wasn't worth drawing the game out. We ended up with a 2-way draw. But like more generally, I think I just kind of found the right sort of balance of assertiveness and amicability that fit that scoring system and that crowd particularly well. It was a lot of people that I hadn't met before, people that I hadn't played with in a long time, and just figured out how to sort of, work with them in the right way for that setting.
What about the convention stands out in your mind other than the fact that you won it? Is there anything else that sort of stands out that you could share with our viewers who, haven't had the same experience of going to that convention or any convention?
So this is my first time going to DixieCon. I've been to a handful of other tournaments, and this definitely had a different feel to it. In most of the other tournaments, the diplomacy is like the main attraction, and it's what everyone is there for. And the other games they'll play to sort of blow some steam off. At DixieCon, though, the diplomacy takes up less oxygen than it does at these other tournaments. People are there to play other games, and the other gaming really takes up sort of more attention than it does at other places. And there's sort of like a friendly overall atmosphere. There's a lot of friendliness at other tournaments, but here it just felt a little bit more amplified. And I think that's partly because there's a lot of people who only go to DixieCon, who have been doing it for like 30 years. David, you have cultivated this sort of atmosphere of congeniality, and it's really nice.
Glad you enjoyed it. You mentioned that you had met some people for the first time. Anybody sort of stick out in your mind there? Some folks that you met for the first time?
Yeah, a few people I'd want to bring up. Keith Worstel was one. He goes by Stitches or Superstition online. Played a couple games with him, and just had a really nice time getting to know him. He's a player who I think will do very well in the future once he sort of gets acclimated to how face-to-face differs from the extended deadline stuff. But real pleasure getting to know him. We hung out a bunch off the board, and we played the crazy game with you, David Hood, Outpost, this engine building game from like the 80s that took a very long time to play. But it was fun. A couple other people. Todd Craig is a longtime DixieCon attendee. Enjoyed getting to meet him and play with him. The game didn't go too well for him, but he was really pleasant about it. And just a nice guy overall. Another person, Cameron Higbee, who was a really good sport on the board. I played with him. And also give a shout out to the person who traveled the farthest for this tournament, Lauren Lloyd, who goes by Poodle Flumps, came all the way from Scotland. So it was a real treat getting to meet her.
Well, I appreciate those remembrances. Adam, we all remember you coming out on top several months ago at the first face-to-face tournament many of us had gone to, since the pandemic started. How did you best that field of players at the 2021 DibCon that you won?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, let me just say that was a really special tournament for a lot of reasons. And I think you already highlighted the main one, which is for all of us who had been sort of not playing face-to-face for a year and a half or maybe almost 2 years. It was really sort of a big party for us to get together again. And I think what made it even more special on top of that was not only getting the face-to-face players together who were old friends, but also many of the folks who had really come into the hobby through virtual face-to-face. A huge number of those players showed up at Carnage, and some were playing face-to-face for the first time, or maybe not the first time, but joining the community for the first time. And that was just incredible to get the opportunity to spend time with them and meet all of them in person, people who we've spent a lot of time talking about on DBN, or some of us who have played, we're playing in virtual games with them. So getting back to your original question, how did I win? I mean, I think the focus for me in that tournament was on my boards was building relationships, and both on direct relationships with people on my side of the board and the indirect relationships with folks on the other side of the board, and really just creating a overall positive environment for the people on the board. And when that happens, I think people are more inclined to work with you if the situation allows itself to happen. And I really did find a lot of opportunities for that, both with my people on my own side as well as cross-board types of situations, and that just really helped me over the course of the tournament. I was fortunate in some ways, and it was a little bit more of a casual tournament. I think Carnages in general kind of have that feel, and it played to things I think I was doing pretty well. So.
One thing about that tournament that was kind of striking was that for many of those people who are coming from the online world, it was their first attempt at face-to-face. How did that play out on the board you played?
I think many of those folks are really extremely strong diplomacy players, and it played out that way on the boards I was on, to be perfectly honest with you. I think there were certainly in some cases some lumps with respect to the face-to-face format and the occasional misorders, but overall I actually thought most of the virtual players played really, really strongly at that tournament, and they've been playing strongly at other tournaments they've been at since. So I don't think it was the format difference was actually a huge impediment for too many of them.
Is there anybody that you can think of that you particularly enjoyed playing with that weekend, sort of your own Player's Choice Award for the 2021 DipCon?
Oh, so many. Craig Mayer was always a pleasure to play with. He's sort of a little bit of a best friend / nemesis on the boards, depending on the season. So that's always something someone I always enjoy playing with. I really enjoyed playing with Johnny Gillum. We had sort of an interesting relationship on our board together in the last round. Karthik was great. Jason Mastbaum is a lot of fun. It's a lot of the usual suspects, but it was really just probably too many to name.
Well, you just tried. So, Tanya, you are the reigning North American champion because you won the 2022 DipCon in San Jose that was run by our buddy Adam over there. Was there anything in particular about your play that weekend that you think helped you win the event?
Yeah, David. And I think, reference was made to this in both Adam and Brandon when they were talking about their victories as well. I think, once you go to enough tournaments and, keep playing, you find that sort of sweet spot between assertiveness and amiability, I guess. Like, you know when to be amiable to someone and you know when to, make that push that you need to make that push. And I think I was really able to, do that. I don't want to say perfectly, but really well at whipping. So I think, people often don't make reference to this when they win tournaments, but the draw is really important. Who you end up on a board with is random, and it's also really important. And I think at whipping, I managed to get boards that I knew I could play really, really well and be able to do well based on who was around me. So, and that's a giant part of that, that luck that came with it. But of course you can have the best board in the world and not play it right. And then you won't win the tournament. So I think I really mastered that ability to play. I was able to make the stabs when I needed the stabs. And I think what really won me that tournament, because I was just about a point or two off of Andrew Goff, I think, or a supply center or two from winning that tournament, is at the end when I stabbed Jason Mastbaum and I took that one dot from John Jameson. Really was the choice. I made that choice to win that tournament and didn't really care as much about the consequences of that. So it's a weird balance that you have to play. When am I nice? When am I not nice? And I think I was able to do it perfectly. Or to get me the result I want at whipping.
And then, wait, Tanya, that was without knowing that the tournament was about to end on that turn, right? When you did that?
Yeah, I had a good idea that it would end. I was kind of banking that it,
Okay.
Even if it didn't end that year, I think in my head I knew I could hold it for another year. So either way, I did know that it is likely that I would have kept that center. I did not know if it was enough to win me the tournament, or if I even needed it, but I went for it regardless.
Tanya, some of our viewers here have never been to a face-to-face event, so tell them something about face-to-face tournaments that you find particularly rewarding or fun.
Yeah, so you're playing in this like really intense game with a bunch of people. You're gonna become really good friends with them, right? You're gonna just bond over, collective happiness or misery, depending on how your game goes. And I think that's something that you can't really experience as much on either virtual or online play. You need to be able to come to tournaments to like really figure out the atmosphere and see how people are like. And, it's been mentioned before, there's other gaming going on. People come in early or leave late so that everyone can hang out and have drinks and just get to know each other. And it's just a really good community to be a part of.
Well, you said something about the draw and how important it was for who's on your board. I played 2 rounds at Whipping. You and I did not have any boards together. How did that not happen?
That's the luck I'm talking about, David. Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty big tournament, right? We had, how many boards did we have each round, Adam?
There were 5 boards in all but the last round, yeah.
Yeah. So when you have tournaments with a significant amount of players, you can, play each round with maybe like fully fresh faces and not ever have or be on the same board as any. I wasn't on a board with Brandon either. So it really is. I'm gonna say for David, I'm gonna say that I'm lucky, because last time we played David, I don't know if you recall, but you stabbed me, and we both ended up not doing so well with Ed Sullivan topping that board. But it was a casual game, nothing for a tournament. But
well, Tanya, I played on a board with David at Whipping, and I can tell you that you are fortunate not to have had that experience.
That was your own fault, Brandon.
You know what, David? I'm going to agree with you. It actually was.
Nothing to do with me. Claudia, let me come back to you for a minute. I want you to tell our viewers, sort of as your last word to them, why they should consider going to one of our face-to-face events still on the calendar this season.
Well, there's a lot of exciting stuff. We've got Vancouver tournament coming up, Cascadia, which is run by Chris Brand, and he is fantastic. So, if you want to have a good time, if you want to play games, if you like to play, you should go out to one of these tournaments. Even if you're sort of on the fence, if there's an event near you, you should really go. And Carnage this year in Vermont, that Adam won last year, is going to be World DipCon. So it's going to be the biggest event of the year, and you don't really want to miss it. It's gonna be a fantastic time. And if anyone is watching this and is sort of on the fence, the hobby is very willing to give you any sort of like assistance in terms of finding housing, or potentially crashing on someone's couch, or trying to facilitate ride shares from airports. So it's we try and make it really easy. When I was a student, everyone was super kind about letting me crash on a couch, or giving me a ride and to a certain place. So really, if anyone is looking to come to any of these tournaments, reach out to one of us, and we'll put you in touch with the tournament director, and really make it easy for you, or try and make it easy for you to come out to one of these.
Hear, hear. Brandon, if they listen to Tanya, which they should, and they decide they go to the tournament and they want to play better, what's your best advice for that situation?
Well, sort of in line with what Tanya was just talking about, how she got these board draws, and she knew a lot about the people, and sort of was able to chart a course through those boards based on her prior experience and the relationship that she built with them. I would tell people that there is a lot of utility in having that sort of insider knowledge and that familiarity with the hobby, and also having people know you, being a known quantity. And so just be prepared that if you go to a tournament for the first time, you are going to be an unknown quantity, and you will need to sort of establish your trustability sort of right off the bat. Before you get to know people, and figure out how you can manipulate relationships, you have to give them reason to believe that you can have a relationship with them in the first place. And so what that means is that you probably need to be, if you have a tendency to be a bit cutthroat or a bit mischievous, you want to temper that a bit in your first tournament, and make sure that people believe that you're somebody that they can work with. Especially the experienced players, they come into these tournaments, and in the first round in particular, they want to get a result on the board. And if they think that you're untrustworthy or unreliable, then they're going to look for somebody else to be a partner. So the advice that I would give is you want to demonstrate reliability before anything else. And then as you get to know people and as people get to know you, then more options will open up to you in terms of how you can approach a game and sort of chart different courses through it. But in the beginning, I would say make sure that you show that you are somebody that they can play with.
And not to say that you're going to do bad just because it's your first tournament. My first tournament, and I didn't know anyone on my boards pretty much, was one of my best results. So it's really about, as Brandon said, just sort of showing that you know what you're doing and you know that you're not going to be a finicky player. It's very important.
And it doesn't mean that you can't stab like an ally in your first game. Just don't do it right away. Demonstrate reliability first, and then you can get trickier later on.
I think that's all good advice. Adam, let me segue a little bit from that and ask you this question. If you've got somebody that is going to a tournament for their first time or their second time or something, how important do you think they ought to think all of that discussion we just had was about how to play better versus just being there to appreciate the experience and meeting people and that sort of thing? It's obviously both, but tell us how you think that newer players or players newer to face ought to handle that.
I think the people who have the best time at their first tournament are the ones who are there to play the game and learn a little bit from the experience and to make friends, and are not necessarily going to get frustrated or overly frustrated if things don't go their way. I think, some people, it is a tough game. It is a game that is very easy to take things personally. It's a game where it's very easy to look around the board and say, 4 out of the 7 people on this board know each other, and they're all just working together against the rest of us. And it may be that is what happens, but it's better to take it with a smile and try to be a friendly person on the board and be somebody who's going to stick around with a positive attitude throughout the game, than it is to just get frustrated at that. And then to talk to people on the board and say, why did this happen? Why did it go down this way, right? Because a lot of the reason that you often do see with newer players on the board and more experienced players on the board, and the more experienced players working together, is because they didn't see reliability in that other person, exactly what Brandon was just talking about. So number one is, so establishing that reliability is great, but ultimately, if you're coming, just come with a good attitude, look forward to meet people, look forward to making friends. And if you're making friends with people off the board, they're going to be more likely to want to work with you on the board as well, right? And it's very easy to do that because it's a friendly bunch of people. If you're worried about getting eliminated, you know what? Other people are going to get eliminated too. And people are playing games and doing other things and going out for beers and hanging out and whatever after the games are over. So that's not something to be worried about, and it's not a reason to not show up. Really, it's just an opportunity to make some friends, and in the context of a hobby that at least most of us really, really enjoy.
Yeah, I want to echo that, because the first tournament I went to was Worlds in Chicago in 2016, and I got eliminated on 3 of the 4 boards, and each one was different and interesting, and each time I stayed afterward and talked with people on the board and understood what had happened, what I could have done better, and each one was just a great learning experience. The whole tournament was an amazing learning experience, and yeah, what Adam said is 100% right. Go into it, be ready to learn, be open, and you will definitely get that.
Well, I appreciate those words, Brandon Fogel and Adam Silverman and Tanya Gill, and thanks to all of you for being back on deadline. And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. For our other broadcast offerings, visit our website at diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.